Hello.
Hey, Robbie.
Hi. Oh, are you with us?
Yeah.
That's pretty
Cool.
tricky, Dan. That's pretty tricky.
So, Anya, sweetie, when we start, could you turn the thing off so we don't get phone calls once we start them?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
maybe leave it on in case people need to reach us right before we begin. Turn it off right when we begin at 7.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dan, do you want to just play anything just to see how the sound's working?
Sure. Yeah. How's this?
Fabulous.
Sounds great.
Cool. All right.
Works through well.
Sounds just like a harpsichord.
Robbie, it's you who sound like a harpsichord tonight.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
what do you do to sound like a harpsichord? You put thumbtacks on the hammers?
That's what oh, his name now escapes me. Did who used to be the tuner at the Zuckerman, Wolfgang Zuckerman, put thumbtacks in the hammers of the Met piano when they used it for Baroque opera before he invented the modern harpsichord down in the village.
Oh my God. Well, I have to admit that the first time I heard a harpsichord recital, I thought it sounded like a tin can of nails.
Well, they used to.
And I said, well, when my teacher first said at Sarah Lawrence, would you like to play your Bach on the harpsichord? And I said, well, why would I want to do that? I said, you can't do anything expressive with it. And he just went to make coffee and left me with this harpsichord in the living room. And that was the beginning.
Wow.
I've lived to eat my words, but
Yeah, you've eaten them very well. You've eaten them very well. Your recording that we got was beautiful.
Thank you.
Very beautiful.
Hey, Stanley.
Yeah.
Do you remember the famous harpsichord that summer you were at Apple Hill and how we drowned it in a water fight?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Oh, no.
I don't know what it was
Great
made out of.
water fight of the 20th century. And didn't it wind up with ketchup?
I don't know, but it was made out of some kind of weird fiberglass or some plexiglass. Or
Oh.
The harpsichord, yeah.
I had one of those things to practice on at Sarah Lawrence, I remember. And it was a very weird thing. And why I stuck with the instrument when I had to practice on that, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was really grotesque.
Makes a difference. And while we're sort of getting organized, could I just ask you what instrument you used for your recording? Because that sounded splendid.
Well, I have to say, I'm probably the only harpsichordist who's a professional harpsichordist who's used such a bad instrument. It was a borrowed Zuckerman Flemish kit.
But those are wonderful.
Well, sometimes they are, but this one had not been played much and had a lot of problems. And I recorded 2 Bach CDs in 5 nights between midnight and 5 a.m. in Via Leva in a church. And the clicking sound on the upper manual, I couldn't manage. But Mauricio Ardila, the sound engineer, is a wizard.
Absolutely.
And he made it sound like
it sounded really good. It really sounded really good.
If only people had known, but I sort of look at what's out there.
Uh-huh.
The original instruments here in museums, and I thought I used a borrowed Zuckerman kit that hadn't been played for 2 years.
And
Wow.
Did my own tuning and regulation and
made it sound fabulous.
Wow.
Indeed, she did. Indeed, she
he's
did.
biased.
I'm not biased, I'm very critical.
I was inspired by the music, and I was inspired by this church in Via Leva in the middle of nowhere, and 17th century church.
Sure.
Between midnight and 5. The only trouble was the temperature, and the church was going down, down, down. So, and guess when I had to tune?
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, this meeting is being recorded. Wait, yeah. Anyway,
for security purposes.
In case there's a lawsuit as a result, yeah.
The time I had to start retuning was at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, God.
Hello, Kit. Welcome.
Hey, Peg.
Hi, Kit.
Robbie?
Hi.
Oh, sometimes.
Make that weird sound.
Good. One of you is, you either have twins or there are two kids.
Oh, that's better.
Maybe we all need to be muted except when we speak somehow.
Yeah. Well, we still got several minutes. There's no telling what'll happen to me. I'm sitting in a chair in a hospital room. Some nurse may come in and try and do something to me that I will have to let them do. I don't know what it'll be, but I'm so glad we're going ahead with this.
It's in the spirit of improvisation, Robbie.
Yeah.
How are you feeling, Robbie?
Excited to do this, but sort of weak.
Yeah.
But I know a bunch of folks who I think are coming who aren't on quite yet. And I see some names that must be people you know from Indiana, Elizabeth.
Right, Anastasia Chan and various, I know some people who can, some people have written that they can't.
I see Deborah Cleaver.
Yeah, yes, Deborah Cleaver, pianist from Portland, Oregon, who,
Yay.
yeah.
Can we say hi?
She's
Yeah.
hiding under the bookcase.
Oh,
There she is.
No, that's not her.
hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I'm probably going to have to leave a little bit early because of a previous appointment. And it won't be because I'm bored. It's just because I have to leave.
Well, your link is not
Thank you so
working.
much for inviting me, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Kaylee, I'll send you the link that was just sent to me.
Okay, sounds great. I have the email on. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hey, Luke, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you? Nice to see you guys.
Well, thank you. Nice to see you. Robbie, this is Lucas.
Hello.
Hello, sir. How you doing?
All right. Great to see you.
It's been quite some time.
I guess. I'm trying to help somebody. Oh, here we go.
Luke, Robbie is in a hospital bed because the nasty bacterium Clostridium difficile decided that it wanted to inhabit his GI tract.
Well, I hope you get rid of that very, very soon.
We're working on it.
Nice to see you, Dad.
Nice to see you.
So I hope Kaylee just got it.
Hi, Elaine.
I'm going to leave my phone on in case. Gene, you think there's a possibility that the link that I would have sent out several weeks ago would have expired?
No.
No, it didn't. I used it tonight.
Okay.
Hello,
Let me
Peggy.
just.
Hi, Sheila.
Hi, how are you doing?
Life is really wonderful. It's so much better than the other options.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly.
I'm just going to call the woman who I just sent the link to, see if she got it.
Excuse me for eating, but I didn't have a chance to get my dinner in, so.
Munch
You're
while we do it.
Do the same thing.
Absolutely welcome.
Sounds good.
I like the crunch.
Oh, you hear it, huh? Sorry.
Hello,
Right.
Jerry.
No, it's fun.
Did
Oh
you
my
get it?
gosh, we all have lives to live, right?
You're
As
all
well as
right.
dinners to eat.
All right. Look forward to seeing you. Crazy.
You want chippies?
Yes.
I got that cappuccino. It's delicious. Would you like a little bit?
No,
Vanilla.
Oh boy, more crunches.
What do you think? You think we have too many people to do a quick go around saying hi? I could start with a quick hello introductory, just a little sketch of how this came about.
Fire away.
So let me start with Gene Rossoff, my beloved friend from when we were teenagers, who also was responsible for starting Apple Hill, the chamber music camp that we started many years ago. And Stanley Ritchie was there at the beginning. Was it when we formed the chamber players? He was our first violinist. And he made me realize that there's not as big a gap between playing Bach and playing Dvorak as you might imagine, which it all had to do with transparency, not forcing. And when I first met Stanley, he was just on the verge of escaping. Tell me if I'm wrong, Stanley. The New York rat race. He was associate concertmaster of the Met. He began to have some tendonitis issues, which made him really drawn. And I believe Albert Fuller, the harpsichordist, got you interested in period instrument playing.
That's right.
And not forcing and letting go is a whole lot more body friendly than the murderous attack that most violinists give to the Bach chakan. I know Anya and I listened to a bunch of recordings of the Bach chakan with modern violinists, and we went through 7 bottles of Excedrin in the space of an hour.
I thought you were going to say you went through 7 bottles of vodka in an hour.
Almost.
Oh, Russian prejudice. But anyway,
Okay.
when I knew we were going to do this, I had this childhood memory, which is sort of sweet. Back in the days of records and 78 records, 78 RPM records, did any of you ever see or hear a recording called The Piano and the Harpsichord?
No.
Well, what it was is the poor little harpsichordist would start, I think it's a Rameau piece. That's Rameau, right?
Yeah.
And the pianist would come thundering in, yada 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 yada, you know, the Chopin Polonaise. And it was all about the plight of the poor harpsichordist. So my introduction to tonight is, this is not a war between the piano and the harpsichord, defending one, criticizing the other, but just a love of great music.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Absolutely.
And what I put in my notes that I enjoyed putting in was Stanley forgave me way back in 1971 for playing Bach on the piano, because I think there was a part of him, it was probably misguided, but it seemed to enjoy my playing. He said he'd rather hear that than terrible harpsichord playing.
Quite so.
Absolutely.
True.
Still true.
But I do think as pianists, we want to be aware of harpsichord playing, what the resources were. I've heard a performance of the Goldberg variation that sounded way more like Scriabin than Bach. No name's name. So it'll be fun to talk about peddling issues that we consider playing the piano. I remember actually, Stanley, you saying to me many years ago that you heard a class, and it may have been Seymour Lipkin, I can't remember who it was, but talking about the key to pedaling on a piano, and composers like Mozart, and if we're permitted in Bach, is not, the answer is not to pedal, but to pedal maybe shallow and with a great deal of frequency. And so what you might do is enhance sound somewhat, but you aren't very often pedaling simply to sustain sound. So so that's introductory. And I knew Stanley in Apple Hill. He moved out west. I met Elizabeth when they were both in Seattle, fell in love with her playing. I decided to give Warren a quick call this afternoon just to say hi and welcome him. I'm glad that he's here. I have MS, can't play anymore because of it. His wife does, so we have sort of a kindred journey. If Warren, if you're okay with me saying that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I remember very much a conversation I had many years ago with Elizabeth, and I was in love with her playing. Basically, and what I think caught our imagination was that we were much more aware of what linked our approach to music as a pianist and a harpsichordist, much more than what differentiated it.
Absolutely
Yeah.
true. That's my recollection. Absolutely.
And a lot of it has to do with how we fill space, how we move, how we convey. If we were all in the same room, we could play theater games of how our body language could convey a crescendo without playing a single note, or how our body language could convey a diminuendo, how we could convey relaxation, how we could convey tension. And in a way, it never occurred to me before, but Elizabeth, you agree that to a certain extent we are illusionists?
Yes.
If you, and it's almost like a violinist trying to play a pizzicato as loud as a cellist. It's almost impossible. Sometimes in coaching a violinist, I'll say just look loud, and it might appear to be loud. It might appear to be loud to the observer, you know, that kind of thing. But shall we do just a quick round? We could spend half an hour introducing ourselves, but how about 30 seconds a person just to say hi, just to personalize our evening? And my wife Anya is not on screen, but she's sitting bedside next to me with a big smile on her face.
And a bag of chips.
And a bag of chips. She thinks she's at a Red Sox game.
No.
Linda, I see you. You want to say hi?
Yes, hi. And Robbie, it's sort of a shock to see you where you are. Yeah, but anyway, here we are. Yeah, and I looked at this E minor piece with you over 20 years ago, and I can remember you saying, well, Stan Sharkey says this and that and that, and so I'm delighted.
No, Stanley Ritchie.
Oh, sorry, Richie. Yeah. And I got him mixed up with Sharkey for years because I didn't know either one of them. And yeah, sorry, Richie, Stan Ritchie. But anyway, I'm glad to hear you in person. And yeah, this will be fun. Thank you.
Let's do this quickly. Just anybody who's in the mood, just pop on screen.
I'm Warren Hansen. I'm in Mendham, New Jersey. Primarily violinist, but I also played some harpsichord.
I see somebody on.
Well, we are duo Geminiani. I'm Una. I'm Elizabeth Wright, and this is Stanley Ritchie. And I played piano from the time I was 5, and ended up being enamored with Bach from a young age. And when I was in college, started harpsichord because of a teacher luring me in, and the rest is history. But I still enjoy playing piano. I'm not, as Emil Naumov said when we co-taught a course, I'm not part of the early music Gestapo.
Yay.
Stanley Ritchie, I was reminded by something somebody said, that when I was first introduced to the idea of the Baroque violin, you know, tuning the violin down a half a tone, putting on gut strings, I said, what? Why would I want to do that? And but then I was persuaded to give it a try, and one thing led to another. The rest is history. I've had a very, very enjoyable career now as a Baroque violinist, classical violinist, and I loved teaching here at Indiana University for 39 years. And I really fell in love with Bach, which I'd hated as a student. And it's been the pretty much focus of the late years of my career, anyway.
Anybody else?
I'm Deborah Cleaver. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I have been so blessed to have lessons with Elizabeth on the piano in her beautiful family home that she used to have. I taught for many years at Reed College and Lewis and Clark College. I'm primarily a pianist, and I'm very interested in translating the Baroque aesthetic from the harpsichord to the modern piano. So I'm very interested in questions of articulation, metric hierarchy, speech and sound, um, dynamics. And I would just say very briefly, I was very moved when I read Couperin in the L'Art de toucher le clavecin, him talking about how you can't play the violin the way you play the harpsichord. And that indeed some sonatas, Italian sonatas, you shouldn't even try to play on the harpsichord, he was saying. And I took this very much to mean that you have to play the instruments that you're playing, and you have to use the capacity of that instrument. And so how you do that, what degree to which you do it, pedaling, dynamics, all of that is what really interests me. And I'm very lucky that Elizabeth has agreed to have some Zoom lessons with me on a project that I'm working on. So I'm very excited.
I have a slight reaction to what you said, if you don't mind my interrupting for other people to say hi, which is, I agree with you, but I think we can sound however we want to sound. So as a pianist, if I want to be an oboist, I'm going to be an oboist. And I love in teaching, asking an oboist how they would bow something, or asking a violist how they would tongue something.
Yeah.
Everything cross-pollinates.
Well, I agree with that. And what I think is that when you move to the piano, all music is a question of proportion on your own instrument. We have a different proportion of sound on the piano than you do on the harpsichord. We have colors that you can't make. We have levels of expression that are different than the way you make them on the harpsichord. And that's what interests me. Because, Couperin also said what he's interested in is what moved him, not what dazzled him. That's not the word he used. Not what, Elizabeth, do you remember that quote? I don't remember what it is exactly.
I would much rather be moved than astonished.
Yes, that's it exactly. I'd much rather be moved.
Thank God, God bless him.
Yes. I mean, just an example is the way we resolve an appoggiatura on the piano can be much more than what you do on a harpsichord. We have certain capacities, as Couperin said.
Diminuendos and things, obviously.
Yeah. We have these things that we can do on the piano, and we're free to use them. But, it has to be, in a certain aesthetic.
But we can do diminuendos. I think I just want to interject one thing that I really appreciated from my teacher Leonhard, which was that he did not view the harpsichord as having any constraints expressively or dynamically. Whether it was this tenor entrance is far too loud, and I thought, what are you talking about? This is one note in a tenor bold fantasia. What are you talking about? And because he heard it orchestrally and architecturally, I heard the same question. I mean, it's like, yeah, figure out how you're going to do this. And as Robbie said, we're illusionists, so we can do that. But there are also things you do to make this much louder than that. But I mean, there are things. Plus, you have to really believe.
Sometimes they're just different on the piano. What you do to do
they're different modes of getting there. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, before we go around and introduce other folks, being a pianist or an erstwhile pianist, I would say the fact that we have a wider dynamic range when we play Bach is not an advantage, it's a liability. And I would say the big problem with 99.9% of most piano playing is too freaking loud. And it's true with violin playing. And
I always say might doesn't make right.
I mean, absolutely. And
just because you can doesn't mean you should.
And I have I think Stanley, one of my ways in which I have eternal gratitude towards him was way more playing Mozart than Bach, and they're not that different, even though Mozart's more horizontal. The way they're similar is the need for transparency, clarity, and articulation. They really share a lot. And what he, I think, inculcated me was that legato can be a disease. Because, and I really took I think I was so used to beauty being smooth that I felt like to interrupt that smoothness would interrupt the phrase. Whereas, as on air Bilsmer would say, it gives words to the music. And if you're pure legato, you lose the words. And the other thing, it goes back to what Stanley and Elizabeth playing that I love when I heard Bilsmer playing this. He hated the word authenticity because it implied that I'm right and you're wrong. And I think the whole world has become less dogmatic, I hope. But before going ahead, just a few more people want to say hi.
Hi, I'm Jerry Levy, and a student of Robbie in Apple Hill and amateur violinist, and I'm just thrilled to be here.
I am Magnus, a friend of Robbie's, and I play a little bit of piano and mostly here to listen to the experts.
Magnus sent me, Magnus is a very close friend who tortured me on the badminton court. He could read if my body was going to move 1 inch to the right, and at the last second, he would hit the birdie to the left. And I've hated him for it ever since. But Magnus wrote me an email that was so sweet, saying that he was playing through the toccata, and it was the most improvisatory piece he ever played. And he shamelessly would linger over all the dissonances without worrying what anybody else thought. And I thought, God, how perfect. Because what I would say, and that we can look at it tonight, dissonance takes time. And Stanley, would you agree as a violinist that a bow change that has dissonance on, let's say when you're changing a down bow, is likely to be later?
Oh, for down bow, yeah, you've got to work hard for it not to be.
Because there's an implied resistance of friction to dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like looking for dissonance in Bach is like a treasure hunt. Sheila, say hi.
Hi, I am a fairly new implant to Brattleboro, Vermont, where I met Robbie. I formerly was a violist, a professional violist, not a keyboard player. Studied with the Budapest Quartet way back when. They were my teachers in college, and years afterwards. I got my master's at Yale in viola, but then I am incapable of playing at this point also, kind of like Robbie. But I love music and still consider myself a musician. So thank you all.
I love your name.
Yeah, thank you. I can't see you, but you
can't
must be on a different screen. Let's see. Did I
Anyway,
find you?
Or and then I think we should jump ahead because it's already 7:20.
Yeah.
I see Elaine and Marguerite and Peggy.
Hi. I'm Elaine Hiller, and once upon a time played some piano and had the joy of working with Robbie at Apple Hill, and friends ever since. And Marguerite?
My name is Marguerite, and I'm a good friend of Elaine's, and she kindly invites me to come back to this wonderful gathering, Robbie, when you have it. I am not a musician myself. I'm a lover of music, and I'm blessed to be surrounded by a number of talented musicians. So my 20-year-old daughter is a classical voice student. So I'm just happy to be a fly on the wall and listen to all you wonderful talented people.
Nice. And Peggy, I think maybe that may be.
Yes, Robbie, I'm so sorry to see that you're in the hospital. I had no idea.
I'll be okay.
Good. I'm Peggy LeVake. I'm a violist And Robbie and I went to high school together.
Wow.
But we did not go to the senior prom.
No, we didn't.
And do I see anybody else from IU who I don't know? Hang Wen? You have the sweetest smile of anybody I've seen in a long time.
Oh, hi, I'm Heng Yuan. I am student of Professor Elizabeth, and I have finished my master's degree in IU for both piano and harpsichord, and now I'm doing a doctoral degree here. And there's lots of things for me to learn from all of you, and thank you, and very enjoyed this meeting.
Great. Should we dive in?
Hi, Ben.
Is somebody else saying hi?
Hi, this is Danny Gillard, and I'm a friend of Jerry Levy's. I've played in a little orchestra with him in the last few years. Longtime friend of Robbie's. We played a lot of string quartets together, but they've all been on the tennis court. So it's been a lot of fun. I'm glad to be here with this crowd.
We're on our way.
Hey, I'm Lucas. Robbie, I haven't seen you in, it must have been 35 years, and you have the same fantastic, kind, loving energy that you did that I remember you for. So it's just so nice to see you. Thank you.
Oh, you too. That did an extra beat in my heart.
I'll say hello too. I'm Dan. I'm calling in from Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm also a longtime Apple Hiller.
Great. So do we have everybody?
I can say hello. I'm Peter, and I'm a non-performer, but a listener and a writer, and I like soaking up all the wisdom of this group.
And I guess, Stanley, you being even older than I am, you've got a decade on me. Do you feel like I remember talking to you about Bach over sometime in the last 6 months, and you said you became more and more aware of what you don't know. So is it true that we don't get wiser?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we get wiser, but and in being wise, we know that we know there's a hell of a lot more to know. That's all.
Yeah.
And anytime I look at Bach, I see something I hadn't thought of before. So he's very ambiguous.
Yeah. Well, let me start. I wrote down a list of questions for Stanley and Elizabeth, some of which I love being ignorant about, and we could maybe scatter them during the time we have together. Maybe we could start with one. Let me see. I'm interested in temporary boundaries for dance movements. So the toccata is unto itself, but if we start with Aleman, Quran, Saraban, Tempo de Gabat, Yashik, and all that, I'm probably leaving something out. How similar, let's not talk, you can start pre-Bach, but mainly focus on Bach. How similar are the tempos from piece to piece when you're dealing with the derivation of them coming from dances?
Oh, that's a really big question. I mean, I think you can always feel in Bach, even in the later pieces, you can feel that he was aware of all of these dances. We know when he was an adolescent that he was aware of it. He was going to concerts at the Ritter Academy where they had French musicians that had been imported, and he was aware. He may have even played violin there. There's a very good book called J.S. Bach, Dance and the Music of J.S. Bach, which talks about this. But at any rate, I think you can't say that he didn't know about the dances, even though he was in Germany. You can see, I would say, a tendency between the 17th century into the 18th century that the danceable tempi for things changed through time. Like a sarabanda started out as a wild and lascivious band dance, and then gradually became made polite for court life and slowed down over time, but you can still feel its sensuosity and the fact that by the 18th century you feel this movement from 1 to 2. There's no substitute for seeing somebody dance these things once, and then even if the tempo might be slower or slowed down, you know the movement, you know the punctuation of it, you know that there were texts to these dances that were really interesting. There's a book, Patricia Raynham, The Harmonic Orator, that has all of these different French dances, and she sets at the end little mini orations, and she takes Molière texts with, you know, a gavotte or something, and you have texts to the dances, so you see exactly, oh, okay, this measures an upbeat to the next, and then you see that's what the movement of the dance is. You can feel that in Bach still, and I think the interesting thing is how it gets elasticized and expanded perhaps. But I think that if you say, oh, well, this is that's the tempo that you need to have for any one of these dances, it's all relative, and you have to understand that not all of the titles of Bach's movements, for example, in the keyboard pieces, sometimes he'll call something a courante when it's really a corrente, Italian one, faster, like the G major French suite. It's nothing to do with the French courante, even though he calls it courante. And then usually the ones where he says corrente, okay, they really are Italian, but you have to look at the meter. Does it have hemiolas? There are a lot of different things that kind of go into recognizing that. So over time, okay, this can't be as fast. The meter will tell you something, 6/4 or 3/2. If it's 3/4, oh, it's of the other kind. There are all sorts of guidelines, but I would say that I think it's a pity if one throws out the baby with the bathwater and doesn't feel the motion of the dance, and what Bach uses with harmonic language, which emphasizes this is such an important moment, and these are where the commas are, this is where the punctuation is, and that's what I find endlessly fascinating as I go through.
Well, those are a couple of clues that we have. The notation of the dances, the music at the time, the dance notation itself will certainly tell us something about what was possible and what was done. But there's no substitute for actually having done one of these dances. If you've ever tried to dance a sarabande, you know it can't be too slow, because you take one step on the downbeat and then the second step, and your foot is still in the air, heel almost touching the other foot, but not quite, and you're praying for the next downbeat to come.
Yes.
So yes, you feel moving forward, and that we're 1, 2, 1, 2. Of course, the metronome is the enemy of music of this period, because it sort of makes you think in terms of meter instead of motion. So
I got to disagree with you. The metronome remained an enemy of forever.
All right, fine. Yes.
May I add something to what Stanley just said about the motion, the sarabande, for example, that there's usually a textbook sort of description. In a sarabande, there's an accent on the second beat. That's what you'll first hear, right? Well, but there's a step on 1 and sometimes on 2, and sometimes there are 3 little steps that are moving to the next one. So they're passing measures. There's usually first measure and the second measure and then the third. It can pass. So there's some that don't have that at all. And if you understand that, and that there's often a 4 measure unit or a responded with another 4, it helps your architectural outline of movement.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you see that written that there's an accent on the second beat, it's a dancer who's written that, and they have a different meaning for an accent to what we do.
It's upward.
Yeah, that's right. They just step, and then step is energetic because they're going up.
They're suspended.
Yeah.
They're suspended. So the poise on that is up in the air.
Well, for example, I give the example of the D minor saraband of Bach, which has, you know, a strong downbeat, yum bum bum bum, and it couldn't possibly be dum bum bum bum, would be horrible. So I think that's important to understand.
But it's also important to understand that you are a master at making what you disagree with sound terrible. Having rehearsed with you joyfully for many years.
Isn't that rhetoric? Rhetoric in action?
Yeah, he's rhetorically persuasive.
But isn't one of the great joys of Bach that there's so little on the page other than music than the notes?
Right.
Nothing.
If we look at the Well-Tempered Clavier, there's virtually nothing but notes, no articulations, no dynamics. And I remember giving a piano lesson quite a few years ago. Somebody brought me in, I can't even remember which key, it was from book 1. And I loved the way this woman played. And basically, let's say it had andante, prelude, and a livelier fugue. I said, I loved it. Could you try the exact opposite tempo relationship? And it was equally compelling. Now, I don't think that would necessarily happen with an allemande and a sarabande and a gigue. But in the case of preludes and fugues, who's to know? And I mean, music can look fast on a page. You're probably not going to go yada. It would kill the gesture. Do you think the reason that worked so well at the time of Bach and into the time of Mozart is that they were writing either for themselves or people they knew?
It was a language that they spoke and that they felt in their bodies. I mean, in many cases, they all had experienced it. And I think, I don't know, I think it's something that the whole idea of motion and dance and text is so related for me. It's just endlessly fascinating. If you play texted music and you can learn French style by looking at French music that have dances in that, you see, oh, that the whole, maybe something is le rossignol, and that the whole first measure is an upbeat to the second. To me, that's more important than any keyboard, anything that I read is understanding text, language, motion, and poise, and using silence and commas, but without, doing too much. The thing that with Bach is the confines of rubato. I wish somebody would create a course. Maybe if I were to go back to teaching full time, I would create a course that is the confines of rubato. Where and when and how much and how do we know? We really don't, but it strikes me that we have guidelines in Bach, depending on how he's written certain movements with the dance titles. I mean, obviously, if he's written a toccata, that is a free piece. It's a free genre. So we have that, but we have fugues within that. And then you have, I would say, perplexing things like that absolutely mysterious gigue at the end of the Partita, which is, everybody argues about this and will always argue about it. We have no idea. Only thing I can think of is Angine Phoebus, who was actually the sister of a very famous bassoonist whom you might, Julie Phoebus. Did you ever play with her, Robbie?
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, Angine was a Renaissance Baroque expert, and I said, okay, about the controversy of how you perform gigues in Froberger, a generation before. There's some that are written in common time that are not tripletized, and so the argument is, oh, well, it's written in 4/4, but you should play it tripletized. So I said, can you please give me some sort of information about dances and gigues, and if there's anything that would shed light on this? And she said, well, originally, a rigodon, for example, was a type of jig, meaning a country dance. There was kind of an umbrella title, jig. Well, if you think of dum, bum, bum, bim, bum, bum, bim, bum, bum, bim, bum, bum, with these angular leaps, you could say this is a very warped rigodon, which comes under an umbrella of maybe jig as a warped country dance. But the idea that you have to tripletize everything is controversial. The other piece of information that I mentioned to you the other day is this lutenist Perrine, who says, this is how this allemande would sound. Allemands are written in 4/4. And this is how this allemande would sound if we were to play it en jig, in a jig. And then he writes it out tripletized. So we know that practice existed probably when they were at a party or some entertainment and they wanted to use the same music, but the dancers wanted to dance a different dance. So they might mutate the same material and play it differently, rhythmically. But whether you have to always do something, this is the thing. We want a black and white answer for things that are absolutely all shades of gray.
Yeah, and when you were talking about the freedom of rubato, I don't think in Bach would be totally different than the psychology of playing Schubert. If you love something, you want it to be appreciated and noticed, you might have it last longer.
Yeah.
And that's a very naive remark, but if you want somebody else listening to it, that you notice this, we say that when we speak a sentence. Elizabeth, you look so lovely today. Well, when I say that, the L lasts longer in my tongue because I want people to know that I'm appreciating how lovely you look today.
Well,
And just think how that would have sounded if you did it in artificial intelligence, which is assaulting us now.
Yeah.
We need to have that kind of place to slow down and move.
Yeah. So I'm a little worried that it's already 20 of 8 and this is so much fun. We could go until midnight, but I know my wife is going to get kicked out of the hospital. I'm wondering if the things that just make me salivate with curiosity, if one can do that. If we could just go through the partita, picking highlights chronologically. And I have a few things that really interest me right at the beginning of the piece. And Dan could help illustrate. And Elizabeth and I talked about this on the phone a few days ago. My inclination would be to hand pedal that first arpeggio. And if you pedaled it on the piano, to get rid of the pinky on the top so you can hear the reverberation of yum, ba, bum. And if you pedal through that, that's where a pedal on a modern piano can obscure the reiteration. So Dan, if he'd be willing, could illustrate 3 different approaches. One, playing the arpeggio, no pedal, no overlap. And then, so this would be example A. Yeah.
Start with that one. And not to give a disclaimer, but this is not a partita I've played. I love it, but I'm
You're not on the spot.
I'm an outsider to it. So here's the no pedal version.
And then you could over pedal. So you pedal all the way through to the middle.
Okay. And now pedaling through the dotted note even?
Yeah, even.
Okay.
And Deborah, I would think a lot of pianists do that.
I would not do that.
I know, but I can tell you wouldn't, and I never met you before. And then the thing that, then what I would do is hold the left hand while the right hand reiterates, and you get the best of both worlds.
So sort of a combination of finger pedal and foot pedal.
And then the foot pedal could give even more clearance for the reiteration, but let's not monkey around with that. But I mean, those are the issues. And to imagine that there's so many issues that can fascinate us in the first damn measure of this incredible piece. Another thing, Dan, that I thought would be really fun to do is, I think there are 8 pairings of that through the entire toccata. What if, without worrying about how you're playing and feeling like we're putting you on the spot, could you do all of them in a row?
All right, all 8. Here we go.
Just to hear this astonishing variety.
Variety. And then
And then you have the ones where it comes back at the end. Maybe is that enough for now, or?
sure, that's enough. I mean, it's already astonishing, I suppose.
Yeah, there's some amazing ones at the end. Maybe do the last several.
Okay, so here's 59 or 89.
89.
89. And then 93. And then 97.
And to me, the most amazing one is the second to last one.
Yeah.
Because that F natural at the end of that, you take the drop syllable or the drop beat, and it becomes the most pungent, don't you think?
It's amazing, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting way of resolving a dissonance. That
or refusing to.
Yeah, refusing to.
Yeah.
Sorry if my cat is screaming in the background. That's what that noise is, by the way. I don't know if that's audible on that.
Not a problem.
Just wanted to say I agree so much with Elizabeth about a sense of movement to things. And the way I always hear this is that the top note is the emphasis of the phrase really is more like one ta da. That's the place where it goes.
Yeah.
So it's like really positive. It's like it stops the movement that to going to
But I just actually answer.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
No. I just wanted to speak to this because when I listen to it on the piano and when it pedals or sustains the opening, it's exactly how I used to play this, even on the harpsichord, because the harmony was so beautiful. I wanted to hold on to it, and but I didn't see any saraband at that time in my life. I didn't even notice if Bach overheld or tied notes in a harmony, which he does many times when he wants you to hold on to them. I didn't notice any of that. I just thought this sounds beautiful, and it sounded gorgeous. The way is, I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's so beautiful in so many ways. But I will say now, 50 years later, I do pay attention more to what Bach notates, and he doesn't suggest holding over those notes. There are many things like in the E minor toccata where he ties over the notes to tell you, hold on to this thing. When he doesn't do that, I think he doesn't want you to do that, perhaps. perhaps. And so now I look at it as a more restless energy combined with the tragedy, which catapults you to get to that appoggiatura on the second beat. And then the second one is maybe a slower arpeggiation. You could make a different degree of over legato within that cobweb of dissonances, chacaturas that he puts in the chords, but it's still going to the second beat in response to the first outcry, and the second one a little less. And then he tries to get up and he goes down, and he tries to get up, and then he does another one, and it's even higher. It's an intensification. So I look at it now based on 50 years of wondering and asking questions, and I think it's so interesting because it can be beautiful in so many ways. But what I now feel more confident about is paying attention to his notation when he overholds harmonic chords and when he doesn't. And I think there's a big clue there. And he goes to these incredible dissonances, and then the appoggiatura is released, and then he tries it again, and it's more agitated or not. And I think it can be really, really free. But if you hold down that harmony all the way through, it does affect the motion.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. And the other thing is that there's so much variety of how do I say this? I've been so interested in the idea of the notation is not the music.
Yeah.
So when you got those dotted notes,
yeah,
the actual speed of the dotted notes can be so expressive and so different from harmony to harmony and melody to melody.
Different. That you don't have to do the same thing with the length.
Exactly.
It means
What if the first one were more impetuous?
Yeah.
And the answer
is
no. Infinite variety, isn't there, in all of those examples that he played? There's so much variety and so much room for expression.
Yeah. I mean, my interest wasn't in how Dan was just playing, but just to see the potential for variety. And I'm interested in the word legato in the sense that I think there's an implicit legato to how harmony functions, because it's what knits music together. So I would say that first E minor chord going to that A minor seventh chord, the harmonies knit together with a sense of legato, but you can articulate 1,000 ways.
Of course. Yeah.
And the cut time would make me want to get to the middle. In that sense, the motion that you're seeking is that. Another question I'm interested in, especially because we have string players, is the relationship between keyboard playing and bowing. So if we jump to measure 23.
I have to leave. I was just going to say thank you for inviting me, Elizabeth. It was nice to see all of you. I mean, all of people I don't know. Thank you. It was really an interesting discussion. I'm sorry that I have to leave.
Oh, like to meet you someday.
Yes, I hope so.
But then if everybody has a score and you look at that, the primary voice in the left hand you might hear dim, bottom, bottom, bottom. And if you're going to try and figure out a potential voice in there, you're going to play it on a keyboard, be it a piano, be it a harpsichord. You may play C in the right hand, da-da-dee-da-da-da. It could be viola and cello. Viola, cello, da-da-dee-da-da-da, bottom. And a potential might be down bow, covering a lot of space, da-da-dee-da-da-da, all on an up bow. Down bow, maybe with a slur, dee-dum, da-da. Stanley, would that work for you as a bowing?
Yeah, down bow on the slur, you mean?
I'm talking about the left hand in 23.
Where's that?
23. Sorry, the lighting is not great in here.
It's the last measure of the second from the bottom system on the second page.
23.
A, E, high C, A, G, E, A.
But anyway, Dan, you could play it, and I don't know if people can see your hand. But all I'm saying is I think a lot as a keyboard player of what potential bowings would be.
Oh, I always do that with the bowings. I always say, is this 3 and 1 or 2 and 2, or how would you bow it?
Yeah. But anyway, I don't want to, and it's funny because knowing that we're going to do this tonight, and I listened to a variety of people play it both on the harpsichord and piano. Nobody did what I fell in love with. Now, I don't know whether it was Stanley's encouragement many years ago, but, and Elizabeth, you were saying that the original version of the fugal section didn't even have an ornament.
Where
But
are you talking?
The fugue.
So Dan could help us here. Could you just play the very first few motifs, with nothing added to it?
No ornament.
That's enough. And then if you were to do it where you first have two voices and just play the bass line, which would be a C sharp and a D.
Oh, at this.
The next sentence. Yeah. So generally in music, people prefer to ornament from above because it creates the flavor or the basil in the sauce, because it's the dissonance. And every single person I heard play this did ba-da-ba-dum, which means the ornament starting from above leaves you with an octave. Can you make that outlandishly obvious, Dan?
I'll do my best.
Now, people hide that they're doing that by maybe sneaking in before the beat and still bringing out the principal note. What I love doing, and I'm curious, Elizabeth Stanley, whether you're drawn to it, is can you just play dum, ba, and stop on it? No, we have B and C sharp.
Oh, sorry.
But with the C sharp below it. Sneak in the ornament before the A sharp. And then the next one.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, this whole issue, and I've grappled with it because I thought the only table of ornaments we have for Bach is in the notebook for Wilhelm Friedemann. He doesn't show a tied over trill or a main note trill any place except when it is under a slur. So for example, if the trill wiggly line were on the second note, he doesn't do that, right? It's and it is in the version that the trill is on the first note, and it's made me crazy over the years. I don't want to trill from an octave. So when I did my recording, I don't even know if I were to listen to it now what I did. I basically crushed the first note. I do it an upper note ornament, but I get to the appoggiatura note really quickly, and I linger on it a lot. And I do that because I'm trying to follow the only thing I know about what Bach wrote about trills. And the other side of it is, though, as I'm getting older and older, I'm thinking, now, if this is modeling this first movement really Italianately, there are a lot of ornaments that start on the main note in Scarlatti. I mean, there's a lot of precedent for starting main note things. So I'm not opposed to it. What I don't like is that any ornament, that any trill that's on that note takes any interest away from the fact that you've got a sighing appoggiatura. And that's what will kill it. If you go on too long with any kind of trill there, you've killed it, right? But it's a conundrum, and I'm trying to say, okay, there's only one table of ornaments. He's very clear for Wilhelm Friedemann. If you don't play the upper note, it's under a slur in a weak position as a resolution. But this is a completely different case, and it sounds ridiculous when you do if you caricature, you do a big accented thing. So either crush it or I don't know. I don't know what to do, but I think Robbie's idea of tom, 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 would be okay at a slow enough tempo. The danger would be that it takes too long and it's not really if Bach wanted that. Tom, 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 he has this kind of a sign sometimes when he wants to delay a trill after the note that's there. So that's my only quibble. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with it, and I felt like I somehow managed to get it out in a way that I found believable.
It sounds very beautiful in your recording.
Yeah. Can I jump in on this one for just a tiny moment?
Yeah.
I mentioned, I can't remember exactly what musical context this came up in, so perhaps this doesn't apply here, but Bob Levin has something that he calls the repeated note trill rule. Does that ring a bell for anyone here? No?
Yeah.
Well, his idea is that when you have a trill that starts on the same note that you've just been on, that it kind of makes sense to start the trill on the note, because then you preserve the gesture of the repeated note. And I wish I could remember what particular context that came from, but
Probably in Mozart.
It was probably in Mozart, yeah. But I have found that meaningful in a variety of contexts, and I think in addition to the particular harmonic context here, that seems relevant.
Yeah, well, you start an upper note trill on that D, you're anticipating the next melodic note that's coming. The E is so the melody D, E, F. You don't want to anticipate it. So the repeated note, I think,
you certainly don't want to stress it.
So I think that the ornament, well, for a couple of reasons. If I were playing this on the violin, I would be playing it faster, for starters.
Yeah.
But dum 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 so that it flowed. But also how the ornament can sort of slow the music down if you aren't careful.
Yeah.
It can become much too important. Either way.
What you said, Elizabeth, that I like is you don't want to give something too much consequence that you don't want to have consequence. And that is, I mean, we'll get to that in the Alaman, because I feel like sometimes when you overdot rhythms and instead of yam, pa, bam, dum, ba, bam, it actually can unweight the notes that are moving more quickly and make them less consequential, as opposed to dim, ba-dum, ba-dum.
Yeah.
Dim, ba-bum. It actually creates motion and lessens significance. Another pattern I thought people might be curious about would be the left hand in 37, where there's just dialogue everywhere. So if you look in the left hand, you have a scale pattern, then a chord pattern, then a scale pattern. And that might be the kind of place where you could have legato, then slightly non-legato. Dan, might you play that with two hands, just showing a slight difference?
Sure.
So something subtle like that could be.
Yes, it's 37.
Yeah. Another thing Bach does, partially because he's dealing with three voices, is there are a lot of times where he'll just write a measure like 49, pure 16th notes. Can you play it, Dan, like he just played as if it's a dodi, dodi, like it would be the E major?
Sure. Like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you were trying to be sort of academic on purpose, but Bach will write that way a lot of times, but want what he wrote here, which is two voices.
Yeah. it surprises me where it shifts to the F natural right after the C there.
Yeah. But it's for me, it's sort of a form of longhand and shorthand. Elizabeth, we were talking about that on the phone the other day, like Mozart in the clarinet trio, writing 64th notes about 50 times in that first movement to make sure some klutz did what he wanted and make sure that klutz got the message.
Yeah.
Stanley, would you say anything about flagging? Let's say even in the very beginning of the toccata, the way he writes the left hand,
let me see, where are we?
like measure 3 at the very beginning of the piece.
Bum, the bum, when he's going E, A, D, G, so forth.
Flagging meaning.
Well, and I remember you talked to me about like in chords and Bach and the violin, that no two flags or stems are going in the same direction. True?
I don't remember that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're, well, you're talking about bowing there, but the fact that you've got two slurred,
I see. You
flagging
mean
up.
the beaming.
The beaming.
2 and 4, 2 and 4.
2 and 6.
That's left
2
hand
and 6.
side, isn't it?
2 and 6.
2 and 7, actually.
2 and 5.
Yeah. So I would make the argument at the beginning of the piece that the left hand is harmonic and the right hand's ornamental.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yes.
let Dan, if you actually played thirds. At which point you could hold that and the right hand play ornamentally with more clarity, right?
I think that makes enormous sense to do. I mean, I overhold those bass harmonic notes a little bit. I might not hold them equally long though, because I think some of them are more relaxed and some of them are more impetuous. So I will release my fingers. And Robbie, you were talking about this, you can articulate it a million different ways, still having that harmonic underpinning, recognizing that, but not necessarily sustaining them the same length.
Yeah.
As the figure goes on.
I wonder if it'd be okay to move on to the Allemand, which I think is the great beauty.
Yeah.
Most of the people I heard played this, and I remember with a tremendous amount of encouragement from Stanley, I ended up playing. And Stanley, if I was quoting you correctly, you would refer to the Allemand generally in Bach as a more philosophical dance. Is that a correct quote?
Well, it can be, but no, I mean, in terms of what the actual dance is, it's just a sort of entree. It's a walking dance.
Yeah.
And sometimes, yes, I mean, the D minor Allemand in Bach's violin is certainly a very philosophical piece. That I've always thought of Sarabande as a rather philosophical piece too. So,
yeah,
in terms of philosophical, in terms of something you're sort of daydreaming when you play.
And could I add a little something there about?
Yeah, you're done. I'll jump in again. Yeah.
Allemands that are in Frauberger suites. There's an Allemand called Méditation sur ma mort future, a meditation on my future death. There's another Allemand that's a lament on the death of Ferdinand IV, which is like a completely free piece. There are other ones that say se joue fort lentement avec discrétion, that played very slowly and freely without observing any strict measure. And then there are other ones that are more measured. So there was a long-term practice in France and in the lute suites and in Germans who took French things to take that particular movement, and some of them are meditative and amazing. We were talking about the D major Partita and that gorgeous, spacious Allemande that ends up feeling so sad, even though it's in major. And so I think he's kind of got the sadness of these falling figures, and he's got the chromaticism going in the tenor line to kind of keep you an honest citizen, which I kind of feel as though Bach often does that. He doesn't want you to get so free that you get completely maudlin with anything. And by having a rising chromatic thing in that first measure in the tenor, I think there has to be a limit, at least on a harpsichord, there's a limit to how slowly you can play it and have that rising tenor make sense. But
Yeah.
confines of rubato, it's so interesting. This one is really, really unusual in many ways, very unusual.
But my argument, if I can go back to what I said about 5 minutes ago, is, and this was with a tremendous amount of input from Stanley way back in 1984, is, let me, without putting Dan on the spot, can I sing 3 different versions? And forgive my horrible voice. One would be, as you see the rhythm on the page, quasi cantabile. One would be with more declamation over and then the version that I end up falling in love with is using the latter one, but with a quicker rhythm, but twice as gentle. Yeah. Which allows the sigh to last longer. Now, would it be helpful to hear Dan do that, or do we not need it? Because where it becomes really interesting, Dan, could you play the second half of the second measure the way it's written on the page?
Second half, second measure. So, right there.
Yeah, just C natural, right? In the left hand.
Did I play the same? I think so. Right there.
Yeah, and one more figure.
Oh, and yeah, sorry.
Play it even more leisurely once. And now, here's what I ended up doing, and the guilty party is Mr. Ritchie, which is starting the left hand ornament after the right hand has already played its 16ths.
Sorry. Sorry.
But it was in that, and what I'm interested in is that the long tones unweight and create this incredible sense of elasticity. Where it becomes really fascinating is measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where you could play that, just that first figure so the hands are together.
That figure?
One more time so we get it in our ears. Now do it again where the left hand ornament starts later without figuring out where. Which is harder, but intriguing. And the one thing I put in my notes that I sent out to all you guys that stayed with me forever is Stanley said, in the world of counterpoint, play every voice the way it wants to be played and don't worry about the consequences. And I love that idea. And this album felt perfect.
Yeah. One principle that I've sort of inculcated in my students is this, what may sound very strange to you, but all music is in one. Otherwise, how do we understand meter? In other words, a downbeat and an upbeat in each measure. And so for me, the ideal tempo for this probably would be
I think that's too fast.
Well, all right, whatever. I'm not a keyboard player. I wouldn't know. But the idea of the flow of the music predicated on that rather than beats.
Yeah,
Don't ever
rather
think
than
in-
beats, yeah.
don't ever think in beats in this music.
You know, but I remember hearing you say that last time I saw you, we were at a music festival together. And I said, God, that's such a broad generality. And then I, on my own, went through about 100 different pieces of music, a lot of Mozart. I said, damn it, that guy is right. And I hate admitting that you're right. But but I think what it actually becomes essentially is a plea for gesture. And
Yeah.
gesture exists in large spaces.
Yeah.
This raises a whole bunch of issues too about gesture and the degree of dotting or not dotting or under dotting or over dotting. There are 1,000 different ways of doing some of these things. And I think falling things or noble things are going to, heroic things are going to necessitate a different kind of degree of over dotting or lift articulation. Whereas the ones that are sadder, with sad intervals, you're not going to do dum ba bum ba ba the same way. So I just think there are so many things we can look at that might feed our imagination about dotting. Is this a falling sorrowful gesture? And you can still do it within a pretty big beat confine, but think in bigger beats, not in subdivisions.
Yeah.
And that's where conductors are evil. They subdivide everything.
Yeah.
To micromanage. And it's just another thing, and I've talked to a friend of mine who's a potter, and he's fascinated by what music looks like. And I was talking to Warren earlier this afternoon about what visual artists might see on a page of music. And so if you guys, any of you have scores in front of you, what I would notice is there's almost a pictorial kind of collage in measure 3. So Dan, if you could play just the roll chords.
Sure.
Left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand. And together. And then the other interlacing.
So
And you've got to admit, if you just see that on the page, somebody who's not a musician might say, damn, that looks pretty cool. And I think naive responses, like I'm fascinated in Bach by what patterns look like. And the patterns on a page could almost, we relate even, let's say, in playing Beethoven Opus 109, the amount of ink when it's more improvisatory becomes really fascinating. And things look like something on a page of music. They look fast, they look slow, they look loud, they look soft, they look spacious. Large intervals usually take more time. If you have you don't want to have to lunge at gesture to enjoy the space that you're existing in.
Right.
A couple of thoughts about notation. If the beaming that we see in this printed edition is the same as Bach's, in other words, the eighth notes and the tenor in 4, 4 and 4. That idea, not 2 and 2, 2 and 2. So in other words, I see that as one indication of the motion of the piece. The other thing, beaming is the enemy of rhetoric. If you look at the first bar, the dum badabadim badabadam badalam badam bada, but it's not that. It's dim badabadim badabadim badalam bada and yam badadi. So the last note is a pickup to the next, but it looks like 4 notes connected, and they aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes a difference the way you play it, of course, if you understand that. If you see it harmonically. Oh.
There's one more thing that strikes me just looking at the gestures on the page and what it looks like as like a painting. And I remember playing with Anna Besma, and he said, Elizabeth, don't you think these notes are looking over their shoulder? I've used it, all my students, if they're here, they know they've heard me say this before, and I always give Anna credit, but if you talk, they're falling from something significant. And then you have the other ones, which have a more directional kind of thing. And I've always thought, yes, these notes are looking over their shoulder. They're coming from something that was more important. They're falling from it. They're not pickups to the next thing necessarily. And if you look at the busyness of the 32nd notes on the page, you could be misled. Anyway,
Should we keep on trucking a little bit?
Yeah.
One thing I love in this music, and I've been doing more and more composing, and composing has made me realize that what I love initially in music tends to be harmony. And it may be one reason I love Schubert so much, and that I'm more in love with Dvorak than Brahms, because his Imagine a World of Harmony is so astonishing. So, if we look at the beginning of the Currente, Dan, could you play the measures where the left-hand triads feel correct? Which would be measure 2, measure 5, measure 6, measure 7, a handful of those guys.
And just, you want to hear the right hand with the left hand as a triad, you mean?
Yeah.
So left hand just blocked out, right hand playing what it has. So measure 2. And
then jump to 5.
Measure 6.
And maybe add the next play.
Sure, yeah. Measure 5 into 6. And then it stops.
Now, let's get to the ones that might feel screwed up. Like play measure 1, which what I think we all agree would be wrong. And I hope you're laughing, Elizabeth.
I am laughing.
And that becomes fun. And I hated taking harmony classes in conservatories. It turned me off, and the word of analysis, because it goes back to your quote way at the beginning of our time together, for music to be felt and touching rather than analyzed. The word analysis makes my blood shrivel. But what is fun is, could you just play an E minor chord? Play the right hand in measure 1. Now, what fascinates me is try it once where the B moves to C on the second eighth. Now play the C on the third eighth where he actually wrote it. I like the other one, but I love the fact that I might be wrong, which is where I think all creative teaching starts. And the reason I like the one where it changes on 2, even though he didn't write it that way, is it adds syncopation to the syncopation.
Maybe he just needed to wait 1 second to tease you into thinking, oh, I've just got a normal E minor here, but not. And then you hear all those blue notes around it, and and you're manipulated. Maybe it would be too soon for that manipulation.
Yeah. And that was one, Stanley, I'm not even sure I'm right, but when I read your book on Bach, there were times in situations like this where you would offer what you thought a harmonically logical solution was. I love the pace. It's a puzzle where 2 things can work.
Yeah.
So for instance, Dan, play measure 2 and 3 and play just an A minor chord.
So like that?
I don't think that's what Bach heard, but you could defend it. No. Now, try it once where you play E minor going to A minor on the second eighth.
Sorry, yeah. So
Which I imagine, but the idea that we're trying to imagine implied harmonies is so much fun. And I'm increasingly in love with the places where there's more than one correct answer. And then if you talk about the relationship between go, wait, can you just play any of those quick scales?
As in like measure 10?
Yeah, the one, the F natural. Isn't there an implied scurrying about when he does that?
I think so.
So can you scurry and then put on little emergency brakes every time afterwards?
All right.
So my idea, Dan, put it right hand and just play an A minor. Dan, all I want you to do is add a triad on the bar line.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, a triad.
A triad. So like A minor.
Yeah. And I think you want to show us the friction. Triad. Next.
Then you get that great appoggiatura against that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I've told some people this before, but it made me so happy. I was giving a piano lesson several years ago, and I was trying to describe dissonance to a student. And I had this flashback to when I was 8 years old at Yosemite Park. I was with the family in our rented car and saw this big 500-pound bear rubbing its butt on a big log. And I said, oh my God, that is dissonance. So I would say right now, if you don't want to be philosophical, but you want to be a little dicey, the triad needs to be louder because something has to rub on something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you just give us a more pungent chord?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's overstating the case, but I think there's some fascination to be had there. Dan and I were talking the other day about brilliance. That's a funny word because brilliance doesn't have to be Vinyavsky and Paganini and all the violin music that we've grown up to hate forever. But can you just play, and Elizabeth, I imagine you would agree, that where you have for the first time where you have the D chord going to the...
Yeah.
Can you just give us one or two brilliant measures, Dan?
Probably not, but I'll try. Yeah. Something like that.
And then maybe just play the cello part or the bassoon part. Yeah, and I would say any place that's legato would interfere with the right hand clarity. And you would say that's as normal harmonic process you could ever hear. Straight on, right on. It could be harmony in a Bee Gees song or you name it. Then can you go where Buff gets really perverse? And can you just clumpify those guys?
So.
That's perverse. That's Bach being his most Italian. And then he comes back to rational thinking. It's bum, 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 as if you haven't heard anything disturbing.
Yeah, it doesn't satisfy what came before. It sort of lets you off the hook, right?
Yeah.
And you sort of say, especially at the tempo, I like to take this, which is pretty quick. Then you think, did I really hear that? Is that, I mean, it's so demanded. You think, oh yeah, that was nothing. His rational mind just comes back. Oh no, it's fine. And then he shows off again, and then that weird passage at the end of the first half, and I mean those scalar things that are so weird. The end of the first half and the second half, that's totally unusual.
Yeah.
you start with that harmonic thing, and then in the end of the second half, he has this amazingly kind of twisted way to get to the end, and then an emphatic cadence, dominant seventh. I'm gonna get back to the E minor, by God, even though this has been a really demented ride. I think this particular corrente is one of his wittiest and most Italian and most disturbing, as well as showing off a lot.
Yeah. And not at the risk of sounding cold-blooded, but I think for me, playing Bach and looking at Bach and reveling in patterns has so much to do with looking at his construction materials. For instance, Dan, if you could play the left hand 2 measures, sorry, I gotta put on glasses, guys. 2 measures at 19.
Sure. Sorry, one
Just
second.
2 measures. Then in dialogue, next 2 measures. And then he takes the first 3 notes and does it a bunch of times. Yeah. And I think one thing harpsichordists do way more than pianists, tell me if I'm right, Elizabeth, is that you'll use non-legato fingerings in order to be non-legato where you want to be.
Well, I would say you use non-legato if you imagine that there's an important word. I mean, to bring out a note, you want to pronounce it. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, my point would be something like, Dan, could you play a C major scale? Da da dee da 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 da, all 2 3 2 3 2 3. Which forces you to be non-legato in that kind of thing, which is sort of a. And then that same place you just played, could you just play yada da?
Sorry. Same. Oh yeah, with the right hand.
Sorry, I'm just tell Bonnie I can't talk. Hey Bonnie, we're in the middle of a Zoom session. Can I call you when we're done?
Oh yeah, right, it's the boss thing. Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely. Don't let me disturb you.
Bye. So Dan, if you play yada da, just that, and then I would hear a little, almost hint of a side,
Yeah.
But then da da dee ba da ba da, new element.
Yeah, it's amazing, the active line.
And then just the way he's in his almost curiosity shot building these patterns is just so incredibly puzzling and intriguing. And Elizabeth, with your sense of wit, fun loving, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think he's really having a blast with this manipulation.
The one time where the word manipulative can be a compliment.
Yeah. You can kind of imagine him sitting down and just, playing an E minor chord and then a 7th chord and then a 4-measure phrase with just a normal straight chord progression. And then how can I twist this around? And he adds the syncopation plus the blue notes plus the delays plus the sighing figures. So he weaves everything he's already hinted at in other movements. Da, 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 and he's just having fun. And it's just very angular. And you just don't get any rest at all in this. It's just silly. Yeah. So I think he had a blast.
Nice. Forgive me if I'm being at all a bulldozer, just on, there's so much amazing music still in front of us in this partita, and we got sort of a half an hour. I'm really grateful I'm in a hospital room with no interference. I can't believe it. I've always imagined the next movement, an air, as being, you've come from a very complicated, physically demanding corrente. And the saraband, probably one of the most imaginative and twisted and 1,000 different things to deal with. And the air is a chance to catch your breath. Can you imagine, Stanley, that you were at a dance and everybody's sitting in a chair at the side, taking a break?
He's momentarily left the room, but I bet he can imagine that.
And the word that comes to mind for me is something that's more naive.
Yeah.
And if the whole thing, and we get it so much from harpsichord playing of rolling chords, I think it's to take the squareness out of impulses. Like, Dan, could you just play gentle first 4 chords in the left hand, maybe with a touch of pedal?
And you want to add the roll or hear them?
Yeah, just very gentle, just to not feel square. And then add over it. And it's funny because that ends up sounding 20% louder. Can you avoid that if possible?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And I didn't hear a lot of readings of this particular air where people heard it as being wistful. And I would say our articulations, our dynamics all come from the word, Elizabeth, I've heard you use 1,000 times, is this: the affect creates everything surrounding it, not the other way around.
Right. And here's a piece where he starts with just this descending tetrachord ground bass that everybody wrote everything on. Yum, dum, dum, ta. And he's just having, okay, let's just play it with the scale, but with a little bit of an ornament thrown in. And then he starts playing around with leaps. Yum, bum, 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 ba da ba da bum. Second phrase. Ta, bum, 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 ta. So he's really taking kind of a dance-like, simple, again, it feels a little bit rigodon-like, but he's, the fact that it's over a very simple ground bass and he's just having fun with it again in a very simple way. Sometimes he's just moving intense. But I think the second half, of course, then becomes more interesting, and it is a 4-measure phrase going to. Yeah, Dan, could you just play at the double bar for a minute?
Starting right there?
Yeah. Right, and then you get you get an arrival with a delayed, beautiful, expressive thing. And then he does it again, the imitation. Yum dum da dum ti da da da. So you get another expressive appoggiatura there. So it stops being a silly piece in this part for me.
Nice. Yeah.
So can you take that at the double bar again?
Sure.
And now he does it dum bum bum ba da 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 bum, a longer phrase to answer, and then he starts with that silly sort of yada bum da da ba da bum, and he goes higher and higher and higher, and then he does this dumb ending with the leaps. Don't chick chick. It's very silly again there. So I think it's a mixture of kind of country bumpkin simplicity, which is, as Robbie says, is a relief from all of the complication of what came before, and puts some very expressive things in the middle.
For when I'm done. Sorry, Anya needs to leave, so I'm just making sure that I'm set for when she's gone.
There's a funny thing about that that little sequence that you were just talking about there, Elizabeth, which is that the ending of it, when you're finishing with this, that becomes the launching point for boom.
Right. The resolution note becomes the imitation.
Yeah. Which kind of puts a funny emphasis on the resolution note. I mean, or maybe you hear it as now a new gesture where you don't emphasize it, but and then
I think it can be, you can have your cake and eat it too there.
Make a point about notation. I when I hear that top voice, the soprano, whatever it is, those 2/8 notes don't make sense if they're real. Beam, 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 so they're tossed off more of the drum, not dee, dum, 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 because they coincide with the bass. There's something wrong with that. And I mean, I know where I speak because even though it sounds anachronistic, Leopold Mozart points out that figure, whether it's a quarter and 2/8, or an 1/8 and 2/16, that would the faster notes would always be a little delayed. And so try it once, see if you can do that.
Be a little bit late on those two notes.
Yeah.
One more time.
Have to delay it that much.
That was probably too much. And
Well,
I still aligned it with the left hand.
Well, it's a 4/3 suspension.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is, but I think all he has to do is overhold the A, make it lighter resolution. And then it suddenly surprises you by having the catapulting up and doing an imitation.
Yeah, just the thought, that's all.
Can I throw something into the mix? And this would be the world of patterns related to legato or less so. So for instance, Dan, if you play a group of 4 notes, in the left hand, just 4 notes. And if that's a release gesture, then you have it again. Doesn't need to be purely kind of
or sorry. Are you at a specific point?
And then you don't have the same pattern. Dia, dia.
Sorry, where are you, Robbie?
Right where you were just playing.
Second half.
Oh, second half, yeah.
At which point, maybe that could be 2 + 2 to show that it's something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that becomes fascinating to notice, but it goes back to Elizabeth's comment way before that we don't want to be distracted by articulation, because then you reach a point where you feel like you're listening to articulation rather than natural function. So I hear dia, dia, dia. I feel like you're like when an actor speaks with excessive diction and you get annoyed.
Yeah, no, I totally overdid it.
How can you be subtle and still differentiate?
That's nice.
Yeah.
And then what? And that would never be legato because that would be a string crossing on a cello. So the leap down to the really long tone, you always have space.
That's right. It could be 1 and 3. Dum, ba-da-da-dum.
Or it could also be daddle diddle dum ba-da-da-dum.
Yeah, it could be that too. But I think there, yeah, I think the critical thing with the shaping of that is that it not get too busy any place except where it's expressive. So if you're really going in the second half to the downbeat of whatever that measure number, where the 4/3 suspension is, there. Dum 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 dee da da da. So if you're always going to the important suspensions in the back of your mind, then what you can do to cheat with lengths that are more important and détaché or legato should be subject to that bigger picture. That's how I try to teach my students to kind of think of the big picture, and then the little notes can serve you where they're going.
One thing about notation, this is alla breve, and I wonder if there's any case to be made for playing the piece faster.
Sure.
Which would make it flow nicely.
And have less gravity.
Yeah.
The gravity which is upcoming.
Yeah.
I'm going to encourage us to push ahead. Dan, could you do something that actually will be amazing, I think? Could you play in the saraband measures? Sorry, I'm saying 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just the harmony on the bar line resolved. Harmony on the bar line resolved. About 5 of them in a row.
Okay, so
And do the big one at 10. So I guess what puzzled me is that, and then if you're going to play any of the more familiar, like the B flat Partita Saraband or the G major, any of those movements, or the E major French suite, could you do you have the E major French suite handy?
yeah, it'll take me 1 minute. I mean, I sort of, I don't quite know it off the top of my head.
Okay, well, let's not kill our time.
Okay, yeah.
But it's the opposite of what I'm accustomed to. And what you have is this incredible motion.
Oh, sure.
Like, could you play, Dan, measure 6, and once you resolve, just go all the way, go until the next bar line?
So same thing, blocking the chords, or do you want to hear all the notes now?
All the notes if you're willing.
All right, all the notes.
But my feeling is that it's traveling from primary dissonance to primary dissonance. Am I out of whack, Stanley, or are you with me?
No, I mean, it has incredibly strong dissonances and then weaker ones, and
Or if you play that measure 7, Dan.
Yeah. Sorry. This measure is amazing.
Yeah, and my inclination would be not to get hung up onto yum, it would be almost a cat's breath to propel yourself forward.
Sorry, I need to figure out how to do that.
there's one thing that's interesting there notationally, that beautiful measure, 7. Dum, da, 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 dum. He ends the dum, dee, dee, da, 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 dee, da, 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 da. And there's a 32nd note, and then that's like a tirata, a scalar thing going up to the next upbeat. Dum, da, da, dum, ba, da, ba. So there's a little bit of a feeling of sweep. I would play dum, da, 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 weakly in the alto. Dum, ba, da, 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 da. And then treat that as a much more theatrical upbeat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of the busyness of the black notes, some of them are catapulting you forward, and some of them are just a written out turn.
Nice.
To resolve the dissonance.
So I'm wondering if we could take a moment, because there are a lot of people with us tonight, and we're being sort of a little bit road hogs. Anybody have either thoughts or questions about anything? Anybody who has not had a chance to express any thoughts? Anybody at all?
I love your enthusiasm about Bach, and it's very instructive to witness people who have been involved with Bach so deeply. So thank you.
Do I say Sheila or?
Well, I just wanted to say I did not know this piece at all. And as I said to you, Robbie, I'm not a keyboard person, so I'm familiar with string music. And just in listening to it, which I did on several of the recordings, I have such trouble following the music because there's so much going on. I'm used to one line, 2 lines at the most, and this overwhelmed me in terms of following it. At least on the first, second, and third listening.
This is one of the densest and the most complicated, and I think it's huge, this piece, huge.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't make sense of it.
Well, and the jig is the bizarre, absolutely bizarre and angry. I think it's Phrygian. I think it's sometimes warlike, which is, well, we're not even there yet. But I mean, I think that the affect can be both dark and tragic. The way E minor is, it's often very chromatic. But the disturbing, angry bits of it, and I think they're there in certainly in that jig, and they're angry sorts of moments, defiant moments, and other movements, I think are an anguished is really Phrygian. Just it ends in such a bleak way. With a major chord, but it's bleak because it's so bare. After all those notes and all this texture, and he ends it, and you say, "Really, really?"
Hey Dan, could you play the very end of the Allemande and the very end of the Partita?
Sure.
As polar opposites.
All right. So the Allemande. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back. Okay. Sorry. And then Partita.
And for my taste, that's 1,000 times too legato. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-ba-da-dum, bum. And why so light last note?
What's that?
Ya-da-dum. So for instance, you could do 1, 2, 3, 2. And that's where fingering would, the fingering would create.
Oh, I see. For fingering. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of thing. That's where fingering becomes really relevant.
Yeah.
Anybody else who hasn't had a chance just to have a thought of any kind?
Well, I have a thought. Can I ask Elizabeth if I know you play the piano and the harpsichord. So if you were going to play this on the piano, how different would you be playing it? Or would you play this ever on the piano?
Yes, and I do play it on the piano because when I go to Colombia, there's no harpsichord, and I play lots of Bach on the piano, and I love it. And yes, I use some pedal, and yes, but I guess what I would always take as the same thing is what I think the affect is, and then see how, I mean, obviously tempi can change. I mean, I can take some things more broadly, but I think that's a little bit of a danger, because sometimes you take things broadly just because the instrument can sustain so much longer. And having come from where I've come from, then I try to apply what Bach's language of tempo would have been relative to what he knew and how he wrote that. And that creates a kind of interesting thing, but it's really, of course I use dynamics, of course I make crescendos and diminuendos, I do all the things that I have to give illusions about doing on the harpsichord, and you can make crescendos and diminuendos on the harpsichord. I've spent my life trying to do that, but the thing is, it's so overt on the piano that it's, then of course I go for that. I don't try to make the piano turn into something that sounds like the harpsichord, because it's just a completely different vehicle. But I do try to keep the voicing and the clarity in my ear, that's for sure.
Okay, because in listening to these pieces on the piano and harpsichord, I'm feeling like sometimes the crescendo and trying to make too many gradations in sound on the piano makes it more complicated to listen to, and you miss some of the directness of the piece. And so I just wondered whether you you keep that sort of directness and you don't do so many
I
crescendos.
do try to do that. I might indulge myself a little bit more at certain moments. on
Okay.
But no, I do try to keep that or
Under control. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? You know, I was interested in hearing some of the adjectives you were choosing, Elizabeth. And it's interesting whether major and minor, we were talking about this the other day, we respond to the same way in Bach as we do in Schubert. And E minor is a key. If you think of E minor, it's a very stark key in Haydn and Beethoven. Even if you think of Beethoven, the beginning of the slow movement of the G major piano concerto, yam, badam, badim. It tends to be a very stark key.
One of the emotions that was ascribed to E minor was warlike.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's the Phrygian thing, the Phrygian and warlike, yeah.
Can I go back just a second to this thing about the dynamics and all the added stuff on the piano, making the music seem more complicated, and just propose the possibility, which I'm not going to defend, that it does the opposite, and that Bach is very, very difficult to follow. And if you use different kinds of coloring as a way of making people's attention go in certain directions, then it may be easier to listen to. And I was thinking particularly of Stokowski's Bach, which is pianoized Bach to the 10th degree. And that was something that actually got people listening to Bach in large numbers who had never listened to Bach before, because it was so much more immediate and so much more followable with all those colors. And I personally find Bach much easier to listen to on a piano than on a harpsichord.
I think colors, I mean, the coloring and nuancing and bringing all that out, I would try to do the same thing on the harpsichord as the piano. I mean, in terms of bringing out colors and nuancing, and obviously not apologizing at all for dynamics on the piano too, because I mean, you've got them, use them. Yeah.
It's interesting.
In my listening to piano and harpsichord, I have to say, the piano recordings of the piece overwhelmed me. It was just so big. And then Elizabeth, I listened to your recording last, and it just made so much more sense to me on the harpsichord. It just it wasn't overwhelming to me.
Huh, that's interesting.
Maybe she's a better musician than the other people you were.
I mean, don't know.
Seriously.
I listened to Murray Pariah. That was pretty impressive. But it was totally different.
I think, whether you play it on the piano or the harpsichord or modern violin or Baroque violin, or if you speak the language of the person, if you lived with the composer a long time and you puzzle over these things, the way Robbie is asking all these wonderful questions, and you puzzle over it and you live with it, it becomes part of your language, and then you use your vehicle to say what you want to say with it and try to move people with it. And so I really, as I said, Emil Naumoff announced that I was not the early music Gestapo when I came in, because the perception is that, oh, if there's an early music institute, people are doing it the correct way, and it's authentic and all this stuff. That's just really crap as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's nothing to do with why I ended up playing the harpsichord. I got kind of lured into it more through the chamber music than through anything, but I had always loved Bach from the time I was little. And some things just started to make more sense to me when I started to play it on the harpsichord. But I really believe that it's about musicianship and about being intellectually curious and thirsty to just keep probing these puzzles, and then you have more and more to say on whatever you have that's under your fingers. And that's the beauty of it. You're never finished asking the questions, which is great. There are no black and white answers. Hopefully it's all about communication, and that we won't have artificial intelligence replace human beings.
Yes, Sheila, I definitely think, let's say, I don't know if you listened to my reading of the piece back when I played it, but I didn't feel like I was seeking a scale that was a significantly larger scale than what Elizabeth was seeking on the harpsichord.
I thought it was really intimate and touching, and that,
Yeah.
and I loved your.
I guess the one I'm referring to is, I listened to yours and it was lovely. Mari Pariah's, which was, you know, huge.
Yeah.
I just stumbled upon that one.
I mean, it's funny because this whole thing about lucidity and clarity, I think in piano playing just suffers hugely. And I think it suffers hugely in Mozart whenever it's too damn loud. And all these musicians I admire, I listen to Richard Goods, I listen to, it's just, as soon as they want a shape, the shape gets, instead of suggested, gets demanded by just playing things louder.
Because they get applause.
And you don't have to get louder when you get higher. You know, that was I remember saying that when we did Brahms, but that was my first memory of playing with Stanley. We read Brahms' A Major Violin Sonata. End of the first movement. It goes up the scale. And naturally, what did I do? I got louder. And he looked at me crestfallen and said, "You're not going to do that, are you?" And ever since then, I've loved that passage getting increasingly gentle as, you know, and if you turn to somebody, if I turned to you, Sheila, and you were playing a lovely thing in Schubert, and I said, could that be more angelic? Would you play louder? Not a chance in hell. But, you know, it's just about 9, but their words, there's sort of words I wouldn't ordinarily look for. I mean, Stanley, you were talking about warlike, but there's something about the last G with an unusual meter, with the tension on the strong beats that diminished in huge intervals. And the words that come to mind to me are words we don't always look for in Bach, sort of jagged, even severe. And you could start with the vantage point and say, yeah, well, Jigs is supposed to be happy.
No. But the one thing I wonder about, you know, I know it's not usually played this way, but what would happen if you use the dot meaning something, whatever, and played da-ding, ba-dum, 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 would it work?
Well, I mean, okay, there are a lot of theories about how to do the jig, and you certainly can do over dotting, but boy, if you do it with this, it ends up, so it's a can of worms we can't start right now, but basically, it has to sound agitated, but I have to wonder why he didn't write. I mean, the meter is fascinating. It's got this full circle with a dot in it, which goes back to 17th century mensuration things. So it's like, it's a cut time kind of sign, but why he wrote it with the note values he did. And then the whole conundrum, some people want you to tripletize instead of I think it kills the piece to tripletize it. This is one of those things where I think it's not a jig that is a danceable triplet jig. It's an angular, upset, very warlike, in your face, defiant, stubborn piece. And those Lombardic rhythms, those short, long are strong, in your face, almost Monteverdi like concitato kinds of figures that make it really dramatic. And if you do dum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum, I had a discussion with Colin Tilney, the English harpsichordist, about this, and he said, I see you're one, because I did a Froberger in 4, and I stuck to my guns, and he said, I like it this way. And so I said, well, what do you do with the last movement of the Bach Partita? And he tripletized it, and he played it, and I said, it makes it sound so easygoing, though, and I don't hear it as an easygoing piece. So anyway, that it's a huge puzzle, that last movement, and it's not like anything else he wrote.
I mean, for me, the rhythm on the page sounds more stubborn, to steal your word,
yeah,
as written. Dee, ya, da, da, dee, which feels too loose.
It's
and,
too easy.
I mean, what Stanley was saying is a possibility. Andres Schiff does it. Dee, ba-da, ba-da. He double dots rhythm, but then he goes yada da 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 da, which seems utter bullshit to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he's even in the Tempo di Gavotte, he hints at that ba-da-dum bum, but the short long thing, that little bit of a Schleifer figure, da-da-dum bum ba-bum ba-bum. And then I just, to me, the affect is just not convincing unless I do it in your face defiantly, and then suddenly you end up with this E major arpeggio, this bright thing, and you just leave everybody, what? It's crazy. That the ending is crazy.
Yeah. And the one other thing that I find interesting is there is this performance practice that if you go back to the Tempo di Gavotte, Dan, if you look at measure 3, it's partially just the feasibility of how we can play. For you to actually play the 16th notes after the dotted figure, he doesn't print it that way, and it's not playable. But can you just play it together the way you would normally play it?
Yeah. Starting measure 4, you said?
Or measure 3, just like measure a measure.
Sorry. Sorry, I should have practiced this for this.
No, but whatever. It sort of makes the point.
Yeah.
And what interests me is that practice of the dotted figure lying together with the dotted figure lying with the triplet went way into the 19th century. It's true in Fauré, it's true in Chopin. And it's partially because to not do it is so cumbersome.
Right, it's notationally cumbersome, and they didn't have a way to write it easily, so they just kept doing this dotted 8th and 16th thing and kept it going, and everybody was used to making it adapt to the triplet.
Yeah. Anyway, any thoughts from anybody? I'm forgetting your name. Chen Huan from IU. Any thoughts?
Yes, just for this triplet against the 16 notes, or the dots. Is there any written out evidence that shows the performance practice issue like in that way? Because in the summer, I told my mom about playing the Bach, and we had that problem.
Well,
yeah, I said, yeah, it should be played together with the triplet, and my mom asked me about the, the resources.
Yeah. Part of it is going back to my comment way when we started, the world of illusion. You can play it together, but still have the illusion that you're hearing dotted figures. And if anybody's ever played the Schumann fantasy pieces, you have the same issue. The fantasy pieces with either cello or clarinet or whoever plays it, where you feel like you're dee da da dee da da da, that you're hearing 1/4 and 2/8 notes, even though the 2/8 notes are belonging to a triplet. And you say that's impossible, but it takes a bit of hoodwinkery to make it work, and it can. And but you can have the same lilt of a dotted figure. You go, oh wow, I'm hearing a dotted figure, but it's a triplet. Not if you don't think it is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. But in terms of the question about evidence I think you can read fonts. I mean, there are a whole bunch of things that you could go into for evidence about the practice of notating dotted eighths and sixteenths, and sometimes, not always, performing them as triplets. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that it was a convention. And sometimes the best treatises are not necessarily about keyboard, but about flute, like on playing the flute, or, and I'm pretty sure that Carl Philipp also makes a reference to it.
Really, yeah. Well, but
sorry.
D minor Corrente violin, now dum drum drum drum. Some people play it the way it doesn't make any sense. But
it's notated as if it were an eighth and sixteenth in that
Well,
case.
he had no other way to do it.
Yeah, he had no other way of notating it.
Had he made it, you know, in for example, the 9/8, it wouldn't be any question. You would use quarter eighths, but I think it has to.
What's the meter of your
Oh,
chord?
well, this one's
3/4. Yeah, that's why he had no way of writing it any other way in 3/4.
But it obviously relates to tempo. So, and I believe, if I remember your recording, Stanley Elizabeth, if you hear the third movement of the C minor Bach sonata, and you have
we didn't line those up. He played his thing, and I'm doing an accompaniment that's just straight triplets.
Right, but then the dotted rhythm, if anything, would be not even a dotted rhythm, but an over dotted rhythm, because in a gentle movement like that.
In a very gentle way.
Yeah,
very gentle.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, we're almost at 10 after. Any more questions or? Yeah.
And so there's a following question. So when this kind of the tradition, this kind of interpretation ends, because sometimes I play the Schubert on my piano, and I've been told that my triplets should be and dotted rhythm should be exactly as written.
My own answer to that is,
I've cited, for example, the B flat piano trio, where you have 16ths, dotted eighths and 16ths, and again, it doesn't sort of fit the context at all. Let me see.
yeah, you wouldn't sing. But
one note, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. So,
and check one, the other place you could look at in Schubert would be that middle section of the slow movement of the B flat piano sonata.
Oh,
yeah. And but the real key there is the nature of the conversation. What you would want out of a colleague or a teacher is never, it should be this, but
it might be.
It could be this.
Could be.
Which gives you some wiggle room. And teaching that says it should be, I would be very skeptical about, because the person presenting that feels like they know the answer, at which point.
But it would be very helpful to have some supportive materials, maybe from Baroque, maybe from classical, maybe from romantic.
Yeah.
Materials. You see.
But look at the last movement of the phrase C minor piano quartet. You have if you tried to separate all those coordinate points, absolutely unplayable. Chopin beginning the last movement of the cello sonata, same thing.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think the practice of flexible interpretation about that goes much later than people think.
Yeah. Well, I think, does anybody else have anything? Because probably should wrap up. The nurses are coming in, wanted to deal with me.
I was just checking to see if you got your thing.
Anyway.
Robbie, you're amazing. You're
It was terrific, Robbie. Terrific.
Oh,
Thank you, Robbie.
Thank you so
Excellent.
much. This was great. This
Thanks,
was great.
everybody. Yeah.
Excellent.
Don't thank me, thank Bach.
Thank you, Bach.
Thank you, Bach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so
Dan,
much.
for playing
It
all
was
those things.
Feel
incredible.
better, Robbie.
Yep.
Yeah, working on it.
Indeed.
Yeah. Good night.
Hey.
Night,
Everybody.
Good night.
Thank
Night.
you.
Good night.
Right.
Meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Good night,
All
Robbie.
good,
Good night,
Robbie.
Gene.
Stay in touch.
Feel better.